Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Global Radio and TV Live, and I am your host, Dr. Ravi. The number to call is country code 1, area code 469 795 8580. The number again is area code 469 795 8580. I would like to thank our viewers in the USA and also in the order of viewership in India, Morocco, Taiwan, Canada, Sudan, Japan, Ukraine, China, Korea, and Iraq. Now, I hope to hear from other countries if you are listening to us. And also, I would like to thank Nasreen Hamri from Casablanca, Morocco. She wrote us last week saying that she and her friends enjoyed our Bollywood special that was specially aired for Morocco. And we also got a call from Mr. Ramakrishnan in Hyderabad, India, and he says that he liked our scam show where the Indian call center scam artists were calling us and trying to figure out how they can relieve us of some cash. So that also went very well. And as a matter of fact, we have another show coming up this weekend where we are going to call Nigeria and India, and we are going to get live scammers online, and then we are going to play along with them as if we are some gullible customers of theirs and see if they are going to fall for the scam. And as a matter of fact, in the previous one, what we did was towards the end, we said, "Thank you so much for joining Global Radio and TV Live. You scammers," and blah blah blah. So that was pretty good. Now, brief introduction about me. I am Dr. Ravi. I'm a pharmaceutical scientist, and as a matter of fact, I have been recently specifically involved in various aspects of life, including science, philosophy, UFOs, conspiracy theories, controversial topics, and everything in between. Now, today we are going to have a very inspiring featured guest, Brian Turner. Now, the scammers should be afraid of him because he is a lawyer. So he's going to get on their case, pretty soon. Well, we will see if we can get him involved with these scammers over there. And he is also an author, a lawyer, businessman, and author of the latest book, How to Kill a Lawsuit. Brian, welcome to Global Radio and TV Live.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ravi. Thank you very kindly for having me on your program.
Oh, most welcome, most welcome. So let me start on this. Tell us, our audience, a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Because this is the usual question we ask. And from what did you do at the early part of your life, and how did you end up writing this book?
Well, I was born in Chicago about a little over 50 years ago.
Okay.
And my father was in the real estate development business, and he told me that I should pursue another line of work.
Okay.
So I went into the biological sciences. I was very interested in science, and I got a degree at the University of Illinois in Chicago, Bachelor's of Science degree in biological sciences. And shortly thereafter, I moved to California. And I did some work with some of the insurance companies. I was doing insurance physicals for a while and recruited some nurses and technicians and slowly built up a company. In order to get life insurance in the United States and most other countries, you have to pass a physical exam. The insurance company wants to make sure that you're in good health. And so normally you visit a client, usually at their home or business, and draw blood, check their blood pressure, and do a very brief physical exam. and submit that to the insurance company. And I did that for about 20 years. I had quite a successful company. And then I had a difficult time with one of the insurance agents. To make a long story short, she ended up suing me. She alleged I was making, annoying phone calls. They were business calls, and I was interfering with her business. She was giving very bad advice to some of her clients, telling them to cancel their insurance,
Wow.
pre-existing insurance, before they got new insurance.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't think that was prudent advice. So I told the clients that you should get a second opinion, that I think that's very dangerous. If you cancel
Right.
your pre-existing insurance before you get a new policy,
Right.
something could happen, and you might not be covered. So she sued, and I had a lawyer representing me. We went to a non-binding arbitration, and
What do you mean by a non-binding arbitration?
well, it wasn't final. If I didn't like it, I could appeal it.
Oh, okay.
For example, in the United States, when you deal with securities,
Right.
stocks and options,
Right.
and you have a broker like Merrill Lynch, which was bought out by Bank of America, or Charles Schwab, and there's a dispute, you can't take them to court. You have to go to an arbitration panel,
Okay.
and that decision is final.
Oh,
However, in my situation, because of the lawsuit, it was not final. It was basically suggestive. And so the arbitrator awarded $20,000 against my company and me. And my attorney said, let's appeal this. I don't think this was a very good decision. So lo and behold, we did appeal. We went to trial.
okay.
And shockingly, the jury awarded $1 million, from $20,000 to $1 million. Now, people scratch their heads and say, how can that be? And my answer is that we have a lot of people in America who are angry, and they're on the jury system, and they're always looking to blame someone. And I think the emotions get the better of them. And so that's why you have occasionally outrageous jury verdicts. The infamous McDonald's case.
They
Everyone
dropping
heard
a,
about
they,
Miss Stella Liebeck, who spilled coffee on her lap and sued McDonald's for millions of dollars. And so people just wonder, how does this happen? And it happens in part because I think there are a lot of people on the jury who are angry, and they
Okay.
want to teach people a lesson. That's one thing. And then I think there is some problem with our legal system. There may be some corruption. And there are a number of problems. We do have a legal system that I think is dysfunctional.
right.
Compared to other countries, we have the most lawsuits of
Right.
any nation.
Yes.
20 million, last count. Every year now, we're close to 20 million lawsuits. And I know you have a lot of world viewers. And what I would tell them is that a lot of countries now are catching up to the United States. And
That's a very unfortunate situation.
I think even foreign countries are going to be hit with lawsuits down the road like America. Maybe not as much, because in this country, I think one of the problems is that the loser does not have to pay the winner's attorney's fees.
Right.
You go to England, and if you lose a lawsuit, you have to pay the winner's fees, attorney's fees. That's not true in the United States. The United States, you can sue just about anybody. And even if you lose, you don't have to pay the other side's attorney's fees.
Right.
So we have a lot of frivolous and malicious lawsuits here, unnecessary lawsuits.
Only time you pay the other attorney's fees is when you are in a divorce case and your spouse is not working. Then, in which case, I do not know whether it is gender neutrally enforced or not. Because is it gender neutrally enforced if the husband is a housekeeper and the wife is a wage earner? Did the judges say, okay, now you have to pay the husband's attorney's fees?
I think it's changing. I think today it is changing that the breadwinner.
Whoever it is,
Usually-
whatever the gender is.
And I think it's becoming more gender neutral. I
Okay.
think there's pressure in the courts. Years ago, that was not the case. The courts, I think, favored usually the homemaker wife,
Yes.
taking care of the children. She usually got spousal or family support.
Now,
But
very,
things are changing.
very interesting because all my life, for the last 30 years, I have been involved in one lawsuit or another. Okay, in two different countries. In the U.S., I have numerous financial cases where I gave money to somebody and they didn't pay me back, and I just ended up filing lawsuits after lawsuits. 99.9% or 100%, I was the one that was filing the lawsuit because the other guys didn't pay theirs. And I also was involved in lawsuits in India because I have some businesses over there, and those guys are the crooks are everywhere. Now
Unfortunately, that's
they are
true,
not
yes.
only restricted to one geographic area. And some of the cases that I have to fight, one of the cases in one case went all the way to Supreme Court of India, okay, in which I won, and this was a custody case where
Hmm.
we will talk about this, and you can tell me. And I know this is a very broad subject. This is a great interesting subject for me because after dealing with 30 years of going in and out of court steps, one thing that I realized is the courts are pretty much um out of reach for middle class and poor class in this country. And it is becoming the same for everybody else. Now, unless there is a contingency lawsuit, like a tobacco case, where they are going to take the case on the basis of contingency fees, almost 95% of all the regular cases in America, I would imagine, they are cases where the parties have to pay a retainer fee to the lawyers, and these cases, depending upon how complex they are, can go anywhere from say $20,000 minimum to all the way up to several $100 million. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. We're in a situation now where it's very expensive to initiate litigation. Very expensive. I wrote this book, How to Kill a Lawsuit, which explains how to protect against lawsuits. And when I
And
meet with people who are sued, they're the defendants, and they tell me, oh, I'll be able to get an attorney on a contingency fee basis. I said, you're absolutely incorrect. First of all, it's the plaintiffs that sometimes can get an attorney to represent them on a contingency fee basis if they have injuries, say an automobile accident.
automobile accident, yes.
Right, where there's some injuries and the lawyers know that the insurance companies are going to get involved and there's going to be a payout. But
Mm-hmm.
if you are sued, you are the defendant and
Yes.
there is no contingency fee. It's not contingent on anything. You're going to have to pay some money. And so I asked people, I was on a radio program a couple weeks ago. And my question was, what's the first thing you're going to do when you get hit with a lawsuit? And the radio announcer said, oh, I'm going to get a lawyer. And I said, well, that's going to cost you about $10,000 or $20,000 just to start off with. And I do know that there are quite a few people on a percentage basis in the United States, they don't have $10,000 or $20,000 to give to an attorney. So then what are you going to do? If you don't have the money, then what do you do? And they walk away and there's no answer. But there is an answer in the book. And one of the things that really shocks me, Dr. Ravi, is that no school in the United States that I'm aware of is teaching anyone about lawsuit protection, not even the law schools. Have you ever heard of a class where you learn about lawsuit protection, how to protect yourself against lawsuits? I never
That
heard
is,
of it.
I never heard of it. And in fact, it is not in the best interest of the legal profession to go and tell their customers how to protect themselves from lawsuit because then how are they going to get their business?
You're right. You're right. I think in this country and even perhaps in the world, I think that's a very serious deficiency.
Yes.
I think one of the reasons for writing the book, I'm on a crusade. I'm on a mission. I want to spread the word. I want to help the public. I don't, I ended up
Uh,
losing a house
all right.
because of alleged annoying phone calls. People say that's shocking. A $20,000 non-binding arbitration award over 10 years with accrued interest, mushrooms, and explodes into $2 million. It's mind-boggling. It boggles the mind. And then you end up losing a house because, a few business phone calls were interpreted as being annoying. How can someone lose their because of annoying phone calls? It doesn't make sense.
So let me ask you a couple of questions. Now, this particular case, is that explained in your book of losing 2
Briefly.
million? Briefly.
Yes, there's a section on shocking
All
lawsuits,
right.
and it
Now,
is mentioned.
without giving away too much, do you have the book with you?
Yes.
Can you show our audience? There it is, ladies and gentlemen. How to Kill a Lawsuit by Brian Turner. Tell our audience where can we find this book?
Well, my website is howtokillalawsuit.com. www dot
As simple as it can get.
howtokillalawsuit.com. And you can go right in there, and it's very easy to order. I have my website goes through a subsidiary of Amazon, and
Mm.
it's now discounted. And as far as I'm aware, it's no other bookstore can match the low price. And I one of the reasons for having a low price, and my original publisher wanted to sell this book for 30, 40, actually $40 to $50, and I finally got them down to $29.99, which I think is on the high side. I want to try to keep this as economical as possible,
Okay,
so
can
everyone
we,
can buy it.
without giving away too much, because we want our audience to buy this, and it's also available from tatepublishing.com, right?
Tate Publishing and Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
Barnes and
but
Noble.
it's very reasonably priced, and high teens, low 20s for nearly
Okay.
500 pages, 60 chapters,
All right.
and it
Now,
comes with a gift. You ever hear of a gift with a book,
no,
Dr.
I have
Ravi?
never heard of it. You know, what is this gift?
Well, this is a gift. This is a special protection plan. Anyone and everyone who buys this book will have a protection plan. And the protection plan starts at about $10,000 on Amazon. On my website, it actually is double. I double it to $20,000. It's a $20,000 protection plan.
Protection against
And
what?
and what it entails is this. Normally, when people buy things, for example, their home, they do it incorrectly. Here in California and most throughout the United States, people usually buy a home jointly as husband and wife,
Right.
and that's not a good idea, because if one of the spouses gets hit with a lawsuit, it's possible that the entire family home could be lost in the lawsuit. So it's much better to have the least vulnerable spouse, at a minimum, own the house. So in a stereotypical example, Dr. Ravi, let's say the husband has a business, and he knows that it's vulnerable to a lawsuit, whereas the wife is raising the family and she's at home. And so it's unlikely the wife is going to be involved in any litigation, any lawsuit. Um, Perhaps driving a car
Right.
might expose her to some liability, so she would have insurance. So it's quite unlikely that the wife would be, in this situation, hit with a lawsuit. So it makes a lot more sense to have the wife own the home. Now, we're assuming that we have a good marriage here.
Yeah, that's
There's
that's another
concern.
thing we will come back to. You know, because I've been married a few times, and especially when you are married, and if you have earned your money or your wealth during first marriage, and then it goes on to the second marriage doesn't last long, but the second marriage gets a windfall. Even though the second wife didn't participate in working the details of this, but now I have to learn it all this thing the hard way. You know, I used to run a pharmaceutical company which we sold eventually, and then at the same time this happened, and we set up a trust, you know, later on, and we will go through this, so, and tell our audience, and a foreign trustee was involved, and the offshore asset protection, all that stuff I did. So some of the things are explained in your book, yeah, as a matter of fact, I noticed. So coming back to the very basic thing, let's get back to the lawsuits. How to kill a lawsuit. Now, can you kill any lawsuit filed by anybody? For example, are there any limitations where certain lawsuits cannot be killed? Now, I know for sure if you are dealing with a wife, you can still mediate. And you know, in England, for example, the divorces are not as conflicting as it is in America, and many other countries it's worse than America. Okay, but the English people seems to have been able to figure this out, how to have a decent divorce. Now, divorce is never decent, but they were able to do it. So, is divorce? Can you stop a divorce, or continue with the divorce without going into a lawsuit, going into a family court?
Well, in the United States, there are situations where obviously you can separate from your spouse. Well, if you really get into a divorce, and you're interested in protecting assets, probably the only way to do that would be using an offshore trust, an irrevocable trust with an offshore trustee.
Right now,
That would be
let's
that'd be
get
very
back to
helpful.
that important question then. If you are, this cannot be done during the marriage, because whatever you do during the marriage is not going to work. If you set up an offshore trust with an intention of divorcing the wife 2 years down the road, that will not work, right?
It could work. It definitely could work because the situation is that during your marriage, if you establish an irrevocable offshore trust and you send assets to that trust and you have an offshore trustee, they're going to be complying with the trust document.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is in a divorce is that the U.S. courts have no jurisdiction over the offshore trustee. So that's going to present a real problem. Yeah, the judge can slam his hammer, his gavel on the bench saying, yeah, I'm ordering the husband to give, $5 million to the wife as part of the marital settlement agreement.
But it's going to go nowhere.
But if it's in an offshore trust, the offshore trustee might say, hey, I'm not going to comply with that court order. U.S. court doesn't have jurisdiction over here in the Cayman Islands, and I'm following the trust document here, and I'm not going to send the money.
And well, if that is the case, if the wife comes back or the husband, I'm just using husband and wife, but it is gender neutral. It could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just for the sake of simplicity, we will say the husband is the one who filed the offshore trust, and everything else. But can the wife come back and tell the court, listen, this guy is all along planning this. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, he set up an offshore trust. He moved everything over there. So this man should go to jail. Can they put him in the jail? Because he is trying to defraud me.
That's a problem. That's a real problem because one of the situations that people should realize is that the courts have what's called in personam jurisdiction. That means they have jurisdiction over you as a person. And if you're physically here in the United States, yes, you can run into problems. There was a very famous case called the Anderson case. I've met a number of people, and they think that these offshore trusts are bulletproof. They say, I went to these conferences.
They're probably bulletproof only if you have set up the offshore trust before you got married to your wife, number one, and perhaps number two, you have a prenuptial agreement, correct?
Prenuptial agreement, yes, that's real important. That's real important. And one of the things I tell people too about the offshore trusts, to really make it bulletproof, you have to go to the airport and get a one-way ticket out of the United States. Once you're out of the United States.
After my second marriage, after my failed marriages, I set up an offshore trust and I got an offshore trustee. Now I'm all set. Now only problem is I got to find a wife now. Now once there are 3 of them came along after this, and they said, well, this guy is having a good life, so let's see what else we can do. So I brought up the issue of a prenuptial agreement, and then I also told them, listen, this prenuptial agreement is really total waste, because if you go to court and we get a divorce, all you can get is the shirt off my back because I own nothing. Everything, starting from my cars to businesses to patents to my houses and airplanes and helicopters, everything is completely gone to the offshore trust. So now this is done before we got married, or we are planning to get married, and therefore you will not get anything. And what I will do is I will go ahead and make a provision that if you live together for 10 years, perhaps, then I can say, okay, now this woman is with me for 10 years, so therefore she is eligible for some of this assets that I have accumulated over my lifetime. As soon as I said this, they all took off. Nobody showed up. So now I realized that this love business that they were talking about is nearly no love for me. The love for the assets I may have had, or I may have, once they find out there's no way they can get their hands on those, they all scrammed. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is a great thing. Now I know, and by the way, I'm not really crazy about that I have to have company. I was listening to Morgan Freeman in one of the interviews, the famous actor. He said, "Hey, you are married to your wife for 30-40 years now. Are you not afraid of dying alone?" And Morgan Freeman said, "Well, you know what? Everybody's going to die alone. What is this? Is anybody unless you are a terrorist?" You are going to take a bunch of people with you. Everybody's going to die alone. So what's the big deal? So that was it. Coming back, how to kill a lawsuit. You talked about, we were jumping back and forth. Let's go back to the easiest case. Let's not talk about my level of understanding of the law is I'm a little bit more dangerous because I have dealt with this for 30 years and I know little bit, so that's what makes me, I'm half baked, so I need a real attorney to set me all straight. um, Instead of talking about very complex subject matters like what I was talking about, let's go back a simple case. Suppose somebody owes somebody some money and they don't pay it. What is the best solution here? I mean, you have a collateral and go after the collateral, assuming this is not an offshore trust. It's, the guy gave a mortgage on his house or her house, um, and the guy is coming after you to take the money, and he says he's threatening you to file a lawsuit. What is the best solution here? Sit down and talk?
Well, certainly trying to resolve any type of business dispute informally is the best way.
Mm.
That's number one. I would definitely do that. And then you have to decide what it's worth. How large is the debt? If the debt is just several $1,000s, then small claims would be a good place to go. It's very easy. You don't need attorney representation. And I think there's a $45 filing fee in most states. It's very nominal. So that's what I would certainly do.
Now, small
If it's
claims court, do you have to follow the strict, in a regular code, you have to follow the strict page length, page height, and borders, and all this other stuff? Do you have to follow all that in a small claims court?
No, there's no pleading paper that
Okay.
you have to file.
Mm-hmm.
The defendant does have to be served
Mm.
with a summons and
Okay, how,
complaint.
yeah, that's an interesting point. So, how do you serve them? Because usually the guilty party is trying to avoid getting served. What is the easiest and best way to get served or serve somebody?
Well, if you believe that it's going to be difficult to serve the defendant, then I would use a professional process server,
Ah, okay.
and they know the little tricks of the trade, and often they'll be able to pin down the defendant and get the defendant served. So, and that's going to cost a little money that you can recover if you win the small claims case. You can always find a person who's over age 18 who's not a party to the lawsuit, and they can serve legally. They can serve here in California. They can legally serve the defendant or defendants. So that's usually not a terribly big problem. There's also a possibility of putting an ad in a newspaper and serving through publication.
Oh,
People aren't too aware of that, but there is a provision where you can serve by publication. If you know someone lives in the county, but you're not sure as to the exact address. So there are various ways that doesn't seem to be a big problem. The biggest problem, I think, in most lawsuits is trying to collect from an individual. Now, if you're suing the government, if you're suing a large corporation,
it's
that's
easier.
usually not a problem. But with an individual, it could be a problem. It could be a problem.
Yeah, that's interesting point because I mean, of the many lawsuits I was involved, I filed a lawsuit against a guy who said that he's going. I was running a pharmaceutical company at the time, and he sent me some huge mixing tanks, and I said, okay, he's going to send me mixing tanks. I paid quite a bit of money, several tens of thousands of dollars, and the tanks are coming. The tanks never showed up, so I filed a lawsuit against him. And
Hmm.
the guy is in Delaware. I was up in upstate New York, and
Hmm.
we since the business was in upstate New York, the upstate attorney took care of the case. They filed it. It went to the it's a federal court and in Syracuse, and they took care of the case, and I won the case. And this was about 20 years ago. I still haven't seen a single cent out of this.
And that's not uncommon, unfortunately. That's a problem from individuals trying to collect. And then, of course, the defendant can actually file for bankruptcy too. Although the bankruptcy laws were changed in 2006, so it's a little more difficult to escape your debts if you file bankruptcy today. And if a person is working, you can garnish their wages, although that's usually limited to 25% of their gross monthly income.
Okay.
And you can put a lien on their real property, their home. You can often you can foreclose on their home. But those things have become a little difficult. There are experienced attorneys called collections attorneys, and they will take things usually on a contingency fee. They usually collect about 50% of
Okay.
whatever they can get. So in your case, well, you said you've got a judgment that's 20 years old. That could be a problem because usually after 20 years in the United States, the judgment dissolves. So, but if
So
there's still time on that
I might as
judgment,
well
you
say
might want.
goodbye to this judgment. It was quite a bit of money, more than about 250,000. The guy went
Yeah.
out of business and he went out of the country. So that was it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that the chances of recovering anything are probably slim
Zero.
to none at this
Slim to
point.
none. So ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Brian Turner, who has written the book How to Kill a Lawsuit. Brian, let's continue this. I think you probably would have never come across somebody who has gone through lawsuits all his life like myself. I want to tell you another story, and tell me how it, I think I was successful in it. This particular case, my second wife. This is a very well-known case, so I don't have to worry about mentioning any of this in public. We got divorced, and we had a 5-year-old son, and she took him to India, and she disappeared. And my son, I did not see him for 2 more years, and there was no trace of him. I went to her parents' house in India. There was nobody there, and I didn't know where they were. So I went to Supreme Court and I filed a habeas corpus petition to look for my son. Finally, they ordered several different states, about 10 different states, police, and the police are highly corrupt over there, and that didn't work out at all. And it was like cops and robbers. I was just in the next door behind her, she's always one step ahead of me, and she was moving my son, or our son, 15 different schools in 2 years, because trying to escape from me. There's some degree of mental problem was involved. And finally, the Supreme Court got tired of my continued pleading through a good attorney there, and the Supreme Court ordered the local CBI, which is the FBI equivalent, and the CBI got on the case. I was searching for my son for 2 years, and within 2 weeks they found him. They do have that kind of capability there.
Hmm.
And they found him. They brought him to the Supreme Court, and that's when I saw my son after 2.5 years. And the court said that my son by then was completely brainwashed, and parental alienation was 100%. He goes to the Supreme Court judge and tells him, "My father is a very bad man. I don't want to go with him." Of course, the mother has been taught him all this stuff for 2 years. And the judges were a little smart. They said, "Wait a minute." They chastised her, saying that, "Is this how you raise a child?" Teaching him to hate his father. Okay. So anyway, they told her to take the son back to U.S. And then they let him go, and that was a big mistake. She took off again, and that's it. There was nowhere to be seen. Then I went back to the court. "Hey, listen, you think that she's going to listen to your court? She took your court papers and then she wiped it. That's it. That's all it is. So what are you guys going to do?" I asked the judge. This is the Supreme
Hmm.
Court judge. They got very mad. So they called the CBI again, and they told them, "Listen, go and find that little boy, hand over to Dr. Chandran, and you take him back to U.S." So within another week or so passed by, they found him again in some other part of the country. So took him there, and brought him to me. They didn't even go to court, because they now give the child directly to me. So I took the child and came back. This was about 4 years ago.
Okay.
May of this year. This year it's 4 years from now. Now, here is the problem with this. Fighting a case in U.S. is so hard for most people, and if you don't have enough financial wherewithal, it is almost impossible to fight any case. I think you would agree. A case like this, or any similar cases, the general public, the middle class and poor class families, are completely priced out of getting any justice in America. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct. One of the things I'd like to mention too is that in most countries outside of the United States, attorneys require a retainer before they do any work. And that's what makes the offshore trusts so powerful, because your adversary has to go physically and retain an attorney in the foreign jurisdiction, and usually put up $20,000 or $30,000 just to initiate the case.
Yes.
And most middle class Americans just don't have
Cannot
that
do it.
money, and that's for starters.
That's only starters. I think it may go up to 10 times more.
Oh, easily.
Easily. 200,
And they
$500,000.
could wipe you out.
Yes.
Definitely. And so, and that's another unfortunate aspect of litigation, is that the attorneys are, basically will end up cleaning you out. As they say, they'll take you to the cleaners, and when the case is over, you won't have any more money. It's really tragic, and I know your situation with your son was very tragic. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, it worked
Uh,
out.
you were
Unfortunately,
very lucky.
I was very
Some
like,
fathers are not that lucky.
oh yeah, almost all fathers are not lucky. I was the only first and the last father, an Indian father, went to Indian Supreme Court, who is actually a U.S. citizen. The son is a U.S.
Hmm.
citizen, mother is not, and be able to convince. Now, naturally, my the greatest help I got, this is sometimes is a blessing in disguise. The
Hmm.
greatest help in this case was my ex-wife because she pissed off the Supreme Court judges so bad.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so she was actually working for me. I felt.
Yeah, I guess she shot herself in the foot
Yeah.
with her behavior or
Now, in
misbehavior.
in
Yes.
your
Hmm.
practice, tell our audience, have you come across funny cases, interesting cases, or something that is heartbreaking, or had a very good ending? Are there any few examples of cases that you can share with our audience?
Well, at this point now, I do a lot of legal research,
Uh huh.
and not only civilly but criminal cases. The thing that I'm very interested in these days, and I've read quite a few books, uh, centers on the problems with wrongly convicting innocent people. Thank God
Hmm.
for DNA technology.
Right.
For a long period of time, we've had so many criminals basically profess their innocence and
Right.
tell the authorities, hey, you got the wrong guy here. I didn't commit this crime. I didn't do this murder. And they would shrug that person off and say, yeah, that's what everyone says. Everyone's innocent, right?
Right.
And then Barry Schecht, a very famous lawyer out of the New York area, he started using DNA to exonerate a number of inmates on death row. And one of the books I read was just shocking. It could be, we don't know, but maybe 25% of all inmates in the penal institutions in the United States are truly innocent.
That is
It,
very
it's
true.
it's it's just shocking.
Yes.
It's really shocking.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. That is a very fantastic research. In fact, it is a great injustice done to primarily, I think, the minorities are the ones who suffered the most because they were
Yes.
just handed over the sentence. The police will come up with some reports, all bogus, false, and all bunch
Hmm.
of lies, and these poor guys get incarcerated and they eventually end up in the death row. It's very unfortunate. Um, let's go back to the more interesting topic, which is. I know that you told in the early part of the story that you get a $20,000 insurance protection. Tell our audience exactly what that is all about.
Well, to use an example here in California, California is a community property state. And that means during marriage, when things are purchased, assets are purchased, it belongs to the community. That means the husband and wife. So, by far, most homes, single family residences here in California, are owned jointly by the husband and wife. That's not a very good situation. And in fact, it's a very dangerous situation because, say, the husband's the breadwinner and he has, for an example, an auto mechanic store. Well, he's highly vulnerable to a lawsuit, obviously, and he needs to protect himself.
Right.
And if the homemaker wife, is taking care of the children, she will probably not get sued. She's the least vulnerable spouse. So it makes a lot more sense to, at a minimum, at a real minimum, if you have a very strong marriage, perhaps transfer the home to the wife through what's called a transmutation agreement, or otherwise known as a post-nuptial agreement. There's another way that you can do that, is to transfer the house to an offshore trust, to an irrevocable trust. That's a very powerful way of putting the home out of the reach of any future creditors. And I strongly advise that. That's very important. So when I'm telling people, when they purchase the book, hopefully they haven't been threatened with a lawsuit and they're not in any pending litigation and they don't have any present creditors. This is the ideal time to make a transfer. So what I would suggest is to take the home and to transfer it either through a postnuptial agreement or to an offshore trust or to some entity where it's less likely to be involved in a seizure by a creditor. So if the book purchaser does that, in fact, then what my company will do is that we will offer a protection plan. Um, And here in California, once you do the transfer, once you transfer the home and you do it legitimately and legally, you must record it in the recorder's office. That puts third parties on notice that the home has been transferred. Well, after 4 years, that transfer is good as gold. It cannot be challenged by any creditor as a fraudulent transfer or a fraudulent conveyance.
So 4 years is the magic number.
That's the statute of limitations for a written transfer.
So
That
in other words, um, the transfer has taken place in 2000 in
mhm,
January. Let's say 2004, 2010 January. Okay,
mhm,
and it was all legalized and filed with the local county office and everything. Everybody's got the notice or whatever the case may be.
mhm.
Now today we are 2014 May, so we have
Yes,
4 years and 5 months have passed.
yes.
So now I took a loan or somebody takes a loan, and then things don't go very well at all, and they have to end up paying this loan. And of course, even if the house is not now nobody would take a mortgage on a property that is owned by a foreign offshore trust. Is it correct? Or
A
give a
commercial loan,
mortgage?
you can possibly get a commercial loan. That's not. It depends on the equity too. Yes, you certainly can mortgage the home. That shouldn't be a problem. It may have to be
That the
a
offshore
commercial loan.
trustee has to sign off.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay,
And
so
the
okay,
trustee
that's
can do
okay.
that.
Now on the
The
other,
offshore trustee could, easily retain counsel here in the United States, or an agent, some sort of agent, and that agent could procure a mortgage.
okay, in which
And
case it's no longer protected if the creditors come after you, because now the trustee has actually given that as a collateral.
well, yeah, that's a secured. Yeah, that would be a secured collateral, the mortgage. But well, what my protection plan does, without getting involved with putting a mortgage on the home, is that after 4 years, your transfer should, in theory and legally, should be fine. It should be basically not susceptible to a creditor challenge. But anything can happen in the United States. Anyone can sue anyone at any
Right.
time they want. And there is a possibility that even after the 4 year period, you can be sued for
Yes.
a fraudulent transfer.
Yes.
So if that does indeed happen, it's not likely, but it's possible, then by all means contact my publisher, contact me, and we will have a law firm defend you. And usually, all it takes is a simple cease and desist letter from a law firm explaining that your lawsuit is time barred. The statute of limitations has expired, it's run, it's too late now for you to even challenge the transfer that took place more than 4 years ago. And the best thing you can do is immediately dismiss your lawsuit. And lawyers would do that here. Because otherwise they could be sanctioned by the California State Bar. And if an individual tried the suit, they wouldn't get very far in court anyways. The judge would throw the lawsuit out. But at least you wouldn't have to pony up any legal fees. My company would do that. So that gives you basically extra security, peace of mind that no other book has, as far as I'm concerned. No lawsuit protection book, no asset protection book. I haven't seen anything on the market that offers anything like this. This is new in the publishing industry.
That is quite amazing because in England, the barrister at law
Mm-hmm.
is considered as a great profession, honorable profession. Whereas you
Yes.
and I know very well in America and India, where I had a lot of lawsuits going on, and where the lawyers are not considered honorable at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the U.S., I think they are ranking along with the used car salesman because
Oh,
of
that's correct. Mm-hmm.
all the problems that the lawyers created, and in the process, they pretty much, the general public is not going to get any kind of justice simply because of the greediness of the lawyers or the lawyering community. Um, Whereas in England, I was talking to another lawyer. They said that we have no chance of filing frivolous lawsuits simply because the losing party has to pay the winning party all the lawyer's fees. So that really tells them that, hey, listen, are we going to win this? And if you don't win this, we are in big trouble. Not only your fees, but
Mm-hmm.
also the other guy's fees. So, do you think there is any chance in any time in the near future the government or the legislatures in this country in America is going to come up with an idea like what they have in England?
Well, I would hope so. Realistically, I don't know. The lawyers are very powerful. I believe two-thirds of our congressmen are lawyers, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I think
Uh,
that's unfortunate.
so
I
that
think
is a
eventually it may happen. It should happen. I think
uh,
that makes a lot of sense. The losing
all
party
right.
should pay the winner's attorney's fees.
Let me ask you another question then. If we are, is it possible therefore then to, if you enter into some kind of a business contract or a prenuptial agreement or anything like that, can we put that in your contract saying that the if we go into dispute with our situation here with this loan or with this marriage or with this building or construction or whatever the case may be, that we can put in that if you go to court and this is the jurisdiction of the court and this is where we agree upon, and if you lose I pay and if I lose you pay, can you put that in a legal contract, and is it legal in all the states?
Oh, yes, it is. And it's seen quite often in business contracts that if there is a legal dispute and the matter is taken to the courts, the losing party is responsible for paying the winner's attorney's fees. Yes, that's common in many business contracts, and I strongly advise that. So I think that yes, and it's upheld. The courts have upheld that part of the contract.
As a matter of fact, then according to your book, then that particular provision in divorce contracts, or I mean prenuptial agreements, or business contracts, or even building purchase and sale agreements, if you put that clause in there, that will kill a lawsuit, isn't it?
That's a powerful deterrent.
Okay.
Yes, and I strongly advise that.
Oh, okay.
And definitely you want that, and have always have a business contract reviewed by a good, experienced attorney. That's really important.
All right. Now let's go ahead and tell our audience. Can you show our book to our audience and tell us where they can find the book one more time, and also tell our audience how they can contact you.
Well, go to my website, howtokillalawsuit.com, www.howtokillalawsuit.com, and there's a contact page, and you can send me a note, and I will respond to any questions or comments that you may have. I'm responsible and reliable, and I will try my very best to help you out. And if I don't know the answer, I'll try to point you in the right direction to help you. And again, my goal here, my mission, I'm on a crusade to help people. I want people to understand that we have a lawsuit epidemic in the United States, and unfortunately I think it's going to spread possibly to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, you are totally correct. I have gone all over the world, and the lawsuit is getting worse and worse, and the attorneys are getting very difficult to deal with, especially if you have somebody who is very hard nosed. Coming back to a few other questions in your book, you are saying that we can file lawsuits. I mean, we can protect lawsuits or protect ourselves from lawsuits by using certain techniques. Go ahead and tell our audience. If they want to set an offshore trust, do they come to you or you suggest somebody else? How does that work?
Well, if someone's interested in setting up an offshore trust, please contact me. I do have some consultants who I've worked with in the past who I can vouch for, who are honest and reputable. And please just contact me, and I'll hook you up with these people.
Okay.
It's a small community, and it's important to use the right people. That's very helpful.
Now, people always think when you talk about an offshore trust, they always think that that is only for the Carnegies and Rockefellers and Bill Gates and who are else out there, okay, or Walmart people. So I am just having maybe $500,000 worth of total assets, maybe $1 million, because most middle class Americans do range between $500,000 to $1 million, considering their houses and other possessions and cars and everything else. So they said, wait a minute, offshore trust, that's only for super rich. Why would I set one of those up? So can people with the modest means, half a million, $1 million worth of total net assets, do you advise them to set such trusts?
In some cases, I think it would be prudent to set up an offshore trust, and it's not that expensive. A while ago, I had one, and my trustee was charging about $800 a year, which isn't too bad. So you don't have to be, upper class worth millions, 5, 10, 15 million to have an offshore trust. But if you do have assets that, half a million to a million, even less, an offshore trust might help. You might even want to consider an offshore bank account. Diversify. You might want to think twice about keeping all of your assets here in the United States. Offshore banks are very, very safe. Look at Barclays. Barclays is larger than Bank of America, and they're a very honest and reputable bank. I don't have any, stock in the company, so I'm not pushing them, but using them as an example. They've been around a long time, and they're very responsible and very reliable, and your money is safe. Your money is safe. You can have hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in Barclays, and I don't think you really would have to lose a night's worth of sleep worrying about whether they're going to go under. That's extremely unlikely.
That's interesting because many Americans I spoke to are quite averse of putting money anywhere outside the US. They won't even take the money to Canada. Okay. So convincing the Americans to put money elsewhere itself is a daunting task in my opinion, because I have seen that myself. Now I came from outside. I came to this country in 1980s, in the early 80s. So I have seen around the world, and it's very hard to trust foreigners, right? So how do you convince your audience or your customers that like you said right now, the Barclays Bank, it's a good bank and you recommend it. Do Americans really can be convinced to put their money offshore?
Well, I think they can. I don't think there's any difficulty. Obviously, people who are upper class that do have a lot of money, I don't think they have any second thoughts about establishing offshore trusts and putting their money, millions of dollars, in offshore banks. I don't think they have any problem with that. And again, Barclays Bank, they've been around for a very, very long time. They're very reputable. And, if they want extra security too, they can always get an insurance policy, I guess, on their bank through Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London will basically insure just about anything.
Right.
And so, hey, if you want extra peace of mind, now I know here in the United States, accounts are insured up by the FDIC up to $250,000, and that's comforting. And I'm not. I think that's important. And so, if a person, had $5 million and wanted to put that with Barclays, and he was really concerned, or she was really concerned about, hey, what if the bank does go under, which is exceedingly remote, I would suggest to them contact Lloyd's of London. I'm sure they would insure your $5 million bank account.
Definitely.
Yeah, so
Okay.
you can always that's definitely something worth considering. Put your money offshore and go to Lloyd's of London and get an insurance policy on your account.
Now, there are quite a bit of difference between the offshore banking accounts. For example, you know that there has been secrecy laws in Swiss banks and other banks. Now, I think the U.S. government has pretty much convinced all of those banks, foreign banks, especially Swiss banks, that they have the authority and the ability to go ahead and open up those accounts and find out who is holding those accounts. Now, is this true? Because that's what I'm hearing, that the Swiss banks and other, for example, if you go and open up an account in a Citibank in anywhere in the world, the first thing they ask, if they find out, if they find out, you say, for example, you go to, I don't know, France, and there's a Citibank there, and you walk in there, you want to open an account in Citibank. The first thing they ask you is, where are you from? They ask your passport. They show your passport. They say, okay, what's your social security number? Now, if you don't give a social security number, they will not open the account. Okay, in France or any other Citibank branches. Okay, so would you say that the American banks are pretty much out of question for an American citizen to open accounts? Now, I'm not saying this because that somebody is interested in evading tax or trying not to file any tax returns with the American government. That's a different issue. That's not the purpose of this conversation. But the question that I have is, if somebody opens a foreign bank account, if it is an American bank account, then the American government knows everything. Now they can bring the money back here, isn't it? I mean, the lawyer can, the judge can hit the gavel and say, okay, you have the money in Citibank in France, in Paris. well, let's get the Citibank guys to bring the money here.
Well, here's the situation. Today, it's much more difficult to evade taxes and to be involved in criminal activity with offshore banks. Switzerland now is cooperating quite a bit with the United States government. And in order to open up foreign bank account, you usually need some sort of letter of good reference from your bank. I know I had to go years ago to, I believe, Bank of America or Wells Fargo, and I had to get a letter or two letters and send it to the offshore bank to show that I was a reputable individual before they opened my account. And one thing that's really critical, and I want everyone to know this, especially U.S. citizens, if you have more than $10,000 in a foreign account, more than $10,000, you must report that to the IRS on your tax form. If you don't, you're going to have some very, very serious problems.
As a matter of fact, I do report that every year. It's not very
Yeah.
much. $10,000 to $20,000. It's not a big amount of money. Since
Yes.
it crossed $10,000, I do report it, and I strongly advise any of our audience, American citizens who are all over the world, who may think that, well, I'm putting money in a bank in Morocco or in Japan, and the American government will not come to know. Now, maybe they won't come to know. Maybe that's okay. But if they come to know, if it is more than $10,000, you are hit with, I think, $250,000 in fine.
Oh, and possibly even a prison sentence.
Prison
That's
sentence.
very, very serious.
So, ladies and gentlemen,
Here's another thing that I think is really important, Dr. Ravi, is that some of these foreign banks do have branch offices here in the United States, and that's a real problem because if a court, decrees that you owe so much money, they can just go, around the corner. For example, I'm close to San Francisco, and there are a lot of branch banks that are from China and Israel and from Europe. And so they have branch outlets. These foreign banks have branch outlets here in the United States. So that could be a real problem for you. If you're interested, again, if you're interested in really being bulletproof, the only way I see it is if you do have your money in a foreign bank, make sure that they don't have any branch offices here physically in the United States. And again, you're going to have to live overseas. You're going to have to live abroad and perhaps in a country that doesn't even have an extradition treaty with the U.S.
See, that brings up my next point. In other words, there are a lot of, well, it's not a lot. I mean, percentage-wise, it's very, very minuscule. There are some percentage of Americans who are very wealthy, but they pretty much decided to give up their citizenship simply because it's not worth paying tax to Uncle Sam. What is the status on that now?
Well, there was an interesting article in the paper recently. I believe it used to hover a few hundred a year, used to just renounce, U.S. citizens used to renounce their citizenship on an annual basis. The last year I hear that it's now up to 3,000. More and more people are doing that. And they're having, one of the reasons is because they were having such great difficulty opening up a bank. I think there was this one story in the paper about a U.S. citizen in Germany. It was just a nightmare and trying to get the foreign bank, the German bank, to open an account. And so he did have to renounce his citizenship to achieve that objective.
My goodness.
But there is a new law now. I don't know if people realize this, but I believe just a few years ago that if you have a net worth of greater than $2 million, you now have to pay tax on that money if you send it overseas and renounce your citizenship, which is kind of interesting. So at one time you could take your money and leave and, and say goodbye and not have to pay, but they closed that loophole.
So, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes it's nice to make money, but making money is not enough. You need to protect your money, and that's where rich people are different from the poor folks. Because if you give a couple of $1 million to a guy on a lottery, it has been proven again and again. This guy who took $2 million from a lottery, within 2 years, he's back to zero. Okay, that's simply because he didn't know how to kill a lawsuit. Because there are going to be lawsuits coming his way, and he doesn't know how to handle anything. So, well, Brian, it's been a very interesting conversation, and I would like to have you back and continue this conversation in the very near future because we haven't done much yet. We haven't
No,
talked
we
much yet.
haven't. In fact, you can make this into a college course, a
Really?
two-semester college course. The information in your,
All right.
your,
Can you
so great.
quickly run through the chapters and tell our audience what are the different chapters on that book in the few minutes left for us?
Sure, sure. They're close to 60 chapters in the book, and
Okay.
this is basically a three-in-one. This is a book about lawsuit protection, it's about asset protection, and about tax savings. And one quick thing too, 99% of the people do not know that there is a way to avoid paying any capital gains taxes on stock profits. And it's perfectly legal. The rich people know about it, as we've alluded to before. They seem to know all the secrets,
Don't
but
tell them the secret yet. Let them buy the book.
yeah, I'm not going to tell. No,
Okay.
no, exactly. If you want the answers to these secrets, please obtain the book, and all the information is in there. But we talk about shocking lawsuits. I explain how about lawyers in the legal system, how creditors can seize assets, what you need to know about lawsuits, what you have to do to prevent a lawsuit, what to do and not to do when you get sued, and what's the easiest and simplest way to protect against lawsuits, why you must separate and protect your assets. And it's very important to use multiple layers of protection for maximum fortification.
Mm.
9 community property states where you can lose everything, why you have to have the postnuptial agreement, the transmutation agreement, what you must do to protect your home. That's critical. You're in Texas, Dr. Ravi, and the nice thing about Texas, you have an unlimited homestead.
Yes.
And so does Florida. So that means that a judgment creditor can't take the family home. I wish we had a federal law where we had an unlimited homestead, but we don't. How a friendly divorce can sidestep your creditors,
Mm.
which is interesting. How to protect assets during divorce. This was one of the topics we just discussed earlier.
Right.
And the not so powerful family limited partnership.
Uh-huh.
Legally avoid estate taxes with a family limited partnership, the limited liability company, how to protect your other assets. We were talking about the least vulnerable spouse, fraudulent conveyances. Timing is everything. That's a critical chapter.
Yes.
Fraudulent conveyance loophole and what businesses should never be formed. Sole proprietorships. That's important. Always form these businesses. How to use a corporation legally. Why your business should have few assets. Limited liability is good. Never commingle assets. That's an important thing. People have corporations and they'll mix their personal assets with the corporation assets. That's a real dangerous thing to be doing. Bad trusts, good trust, revocable trusts, irrevocable trusts, trustees. How do you pick them?
How do you
Chapter on
pay them?
that.
Yes.
Offshore banking and investing, personal exempt property, one-person companies. You got to be very careful these days. The courts don't like that. We talked about offshore trusts and international business companies and how there's some problems with them. They may no longer be bulletproof. How to protect your inheritance, how to handle creditors, and debtors exams. If you have creditors after you, they're going to call you in for what's called a debtors exam. Oh, and the right to privacy is a myth. Yeah, that's really important now, especially with the U.S. Patriot Act. That's
Right.
really an important chapter.
Okay.
The art of successful settlement negotiation, that's critical if you're involved in a lawsuit. You need to know that. Here in America, avoiding foreclosure, that's an important topic. Nominee officers, how to earn a living after a judgment. What do you do if you get a big $1 million judgment? Can you go on? Can you continue to work? We talk about that there. Little known asset protection secrets, the new bankruptcy, tax consequences, and power of poverty. Asset forfeiture laws, deeds, mortgages, we were talking about that, estates and taxes, wills, succession planning.
Mm.
How America is turning its senior citizens into criminals. That's a very interesting
All right. So
segment there.
we
Annuities,
actually
and is your
coming
retirement
to
plan safe?
Brian.
And advanced techniques.
Yeah, Brian, we have come to a conclusion on this show. And ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Brian Turner, author of the book How to Kill a Lawsuit. He has gone through the entire chapter, chapter by chapter, just the titles. We also discussed certain interesting cases and cases from my own personal life, and he has reviewed some of the things that I was having questions about. So it's a fascinating conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Global Radio and TV Live. I am your host, Dr. Ravi. Our featured guest was Brian Turner, author, lawyer, and a businessman, and also the author of the latest book, How to Kill a Lawsuit, available at Amazon.com and also Tate Publishing, and also on the website, How to Kill a Lawsuit. Is that right? HowToKillALawsuit.com?
Yes.
Okay. Very good, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us, and we would like to have you come back here and continue this conversation in the very soon and in the next few months.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. It'd be a pleasure to return to your program to continue this discussion.
All right, very good. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will
You're
be right
welcome.
back. Brian, please stay on the line.